it was illegal for parents to seek support or to push back on districts. So this was a huge step for the disability community. I'm Tiffany Hunt, and I am a faculty member in the special education program, both for the undergrad and graduate degrees, and I'm the program coordinator for both of those programs as well. The disability community back in the 60s, were really pushing for protections and to become a protected class. We really came together and with a lot of help with advocates and pushed and pushed and pushed, and they even, I think, put themselves up in a building for a long period of time and threw themselves in the street in New York to prevent traffic from coming across. They climbed the stairs of, I think it's the Capitol, but some building, and a lot of them were individuals that had wheelchairs. So they would pull themselves up to the top of this building to demonstrate how difficult it was and then what they had to do to get there. And anyway, so then Nixon signed the Rehabilitation Act. It is really a civil rights law that protects against discrimination. So, I mean, it was a really huge deal. And meanwhile, parents of students with disabilities, they got tired of not having their kids in school. For a really long time in our country, students with disabilities did not really have rights. In fact, parents were even advised when they would have a child with a disability, a significant disability like that, that they couldn't handle this child and they should just put them in the state institution. And those institutions became overrun and they didn't have enough staff, and there were some really horrific conditions these kids were in. And they didn't learn anything. They weren't in with, other peers that don't have disabilities. And so they just kind of, learn from each other, and that's not super beneficial. And in fact, district schools could completely refuse to serve kids. They could have them in their school and then just expel them indefinitely. And parents didn't have any right to push back and to say, no, my child also deserves an education. So they really started pushing, and the Supreme Court case Brown versus Board of Education essentially came out to say, that separate is not equal. And this was about race. However, the disability community and parents and these advocates were able to utilize that decision to say, if separate isn't equal, then certainly complete segregation, like that, my kids don't even get to participate. My kids don't even get to be in the school. They don't even have a school. Certainly that can't be constitutional. That can't be okay. And so they were able to win some pretty major cases, which then led to the special education law that we have. There's a lot of historical pieces to it, but eventually in 1975, we had our first law specific to special education, and that's why we have special ed services today. But essentially, the main portion of this law, or the big kind of win for parents, was that it gave a right for students with disabilities to be provided a public education. And in fact, they mandated that it was a free, appropriate public education that districts absolutely had to provide to these students. It also gave parents due process rights. So if a decision were made about your child, for instance, being expelled, parents would have due process. They could, say, I disagree with this decision, and would actually have a right to fight that. That doesn't mean they'd always win, but they have an avenue for that. Where in the past, there were actual laws written against that. It was illegal for parents to seek support or to push back on districts. So this was a huge step for the disability community. So things have changed quite a bit since this law first came to pass. The initial goal of the law was to get kids in school. Because remember, some kids were not receiving education. Millions of kids that had disabilities were not receiving an education at all. And so it was a real push to say, my child deserves to be in this school. My kiddo deserves to have an education. And there was a thought quite a long time ago that students with disabilities couldn't benefit from education, especially students that had maybe more significant disabilities, or what we'd say is low incidence disabilities. And so there was kind of this misconception that they would not benefit from education, which we know is absolutely not the case. So that's kind of the first aim of that law, was just to get kids in the door. As the law kind of progressed and as time went on, then the law kind of started to shift, and the mindset shifted from, okay, I want my kid in the classroom, we want these kids to be educated with their peers, to these kids actually should benefit from their education too. It's not enough that they're just sitting in class. It's not enough that they're just in the building anymore. They should actually be making progress. They should actually be benefiting from their instruction. So that's how the law has really progressed. And now we look more towards quality and progress and ensuring that, yes, the student is receiving an individualized program, but that individualized program is allowing them to make progress in light of their unique circumstances. So based on what we would expect for this particular child, what progress looks like for this kiddo versus another kiddo. There's another law called the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it is another disability law that is the same thing as Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, that it protects against discrimination and affords people access. The difference, Section 504 is similar, it's just that Section 504 only applied to federally funded organizations, and then ADA expanded it, so now any organization, no matter who you are, has to abide by that law. We are an inclusive society, and individuals that don't necessarily understand or have someone in their family or know somebody that has a disability are unaware of some of the obstacles that our individuals with disabilities face. Thank goodness we have ADA today, right? There continue to be things that we need to progress in, but it's been a lot of progress.